COLONIZE, a horror story by Avery Eversummer. Justin sits outside of his house, resting on the curb. He is waiting for the exterminator to arrive. How long has he been waiting? He can't quite recall, though it has felt like days. He refuses to go back inside, knowing exactly what waits for him there, what would swarm him and leave behind nothing but bones, if he was lucky. He does not want to think about what will happen if he isn't lucky, though a part of him knows and yearns for it. He is wearing layers upon layers in hopes of covering his skin, and hopes that the ants will not reach his flesh, and it is sweltering. The heat of the summer beat down on him, and the world spun around his head. He knows that it's cool inside, that for a brief moment he would find reprieve from this endless heat back within his home, but he won't budge from the curb. He won't listen to the siren's call of cool air, knowing every inch of the conditioning unit was filled with those crawling things that bite and nip and devour. He will suffer through the heat, as long as it takes. A sleek black van pulls down the neighborhood street, pulling into his driveway with slight hesitation. A logo is painted on the side, a red circle containing a crossed out picture of an ant. It is freakishly detailed, its tiny little hairs visible and poking, empty and lifeless black eyes staring into his, and the antenna twitch as it sits there. It is only a picture, Justin tells himself, but the ant's stare tells him it is not, all while he waits for the driver to step out. They are wearing a white jumpsuit with a thick pair of gloves to match, goggles pulled up onto their forehead, and a respirator dangling around their neck. Their hair is grayed out, pulled into a ponytail that is tangled within itself. Their eyes are dark, and he cannot meet them. In their hands, they hold a clipboard. "Are you Justin?" they ask, and he can only nod weakly. He knows that opening his mouth will only give them more places to bite. His skin crawls as the very thought of those foul creatures getting him inside of him crosses his mind. And when did it start, Justin? When did the infestation begin? They ask, and Justin doesn't know how to answer. He doesn't want to answer. He just wants to tell this stranger to get rid of the ants and leave him alone, but the words die on his lips as they try to escape. The exterminator just stares at him, waiting for a response. Justin can feel a silken thread writhing its way around his neck, tiny and invisible but tight. Then comes a pinprick of sharp pain as it pierces into his skin through what it is he cannot fathom, though it moves through him, coiling around his mind. The exterminator continues to wait, and Justin is trembling. The smile on the stranger's face is cruel and demanding, but he can't bring himself to speak. The thread begins to pull, and his mind finds itself reliving memories it tried with such desperation to forget. The ants are crawling in his brain, scratching and itching at every corner in a way that he cannot reach, and he wants to scream. The exterminator taps their pen on the clipboard, empty, hollowed eyes staring down. The ants are crawling through his veins, burrowing holes through his flesh and turning his body into the nest they crave. The thread pulls tighter, every word and every memory threatening to spill forth, but he won't allow it. Instead, he vomits on the pavement in front of him. There are 1,000 tiny black dots in the bile pooled before his feet, and they writhe in anguish. He looks up at the stranger, and they are still smiling. "When did it start?" they ask again, feigning patience, but it is clear that they have none. Justin wipes his lips and allows the words to finally be said. "A few months ago. I saw the first one a few months ago. I didn't think anything of it. It's the middle of summer, and it's hardly unusual to see a few ants around. One or two in the kitchen or the living room where I accidentally left some of last night's pizza, the normal stuff. I would squish them when I saw them, and I would be done with it. It wasn't a big deal. It was fine. Every now and then I would see a few ants, kill them, and move on with my life. Except it didn't stay like that. One or two ants became 4 or 5, 8 or 9, to whole rows of ants marching across my coffee table or kitchen counter. It got more frequent, too. Instead of once every few days, it was every time I looked over to any remotely flat surface. Just out of the corner of my eye, a line of ants marching to the wall and upwards to the ceiling, no matter where I was. I took to carrying bug spray around. I put traps everywhere, but the number of ants didn't change. In fact, every time I tried to get rid of them, it seemed like there would be even more ants the next day. I clearly had some kind of infestation that needed to be dealt with, and that's why I called you. To just get rid of the ants so I can live in peace, but that's when I thought I knew what they were. I don't know when I noticed it. They were never taking any food, never taking any crumbs or anything at all back to the colony. They just marched around across my house, never going anywhere, never coming from somewhere. They just existed, and their entire purpose in existing was to get on my nerves and leave my skin crawling with that awful feeling. I know they aren't ants. These things are malicious and cruel and filled with spite. The night I called you, it got worse. They were angry, and because of it, I had the most awful experience. I was laying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun idly above me. It felt so real, but I couldn't move a muscle. I've heard about sleep paralysis before, but I had never experienced it, never knew how utterly horrifying it was. I stared unblinking at the ceiling fan, and I waited for it to end, for the looming sense of dread to go away. When I felt it, the slightest sensation of something crawling on my skin, the tiniest itch followed by another and then another, I wish I could scream. I couldn't look, but I knew what it was. I knew it was the ants marching across my body. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't move to brush them off. They marched up my chest, their steps burning as they grew closer to my neck, moving across my face, and with horror it dawned on me exactly where they were going. There was nothing I could do as the line of ants traveled past my lips and into my mouth. Another line started up on my torso, more crawling little ants marching their little legs across my body and then towards my mouth. Then I felt them biting. I felt them burrowing. I felt them turning my veins into the tunnels of their nest and even further beyond. They didn't stop, endless streams of ants skittering over my skin and delving into my flesh. There was nothing I could do, save for wishing it to end. They began to enter from new places, biting and tearing at skin to burrow towards their nest while others dug from the inside out. I don't know how long it lasted, but waking up brought the greatest sensation of relief. It didn't last long. When I went to take a shower after waking, I saw the tight clusters of holes in my skin. Some were on my thighs, some my forearms, the back of my hands, and others upon my neck. When I saw them, I could feel the crawling just underneath the surface. I collapsed in the shower, and I scratched until I was sure there was nothing inside. After another night of that awful experience, I took to drinking, and I slept in my car. I hoped that somehow the alcohol would poison the ants I knew wanted to live inside me, but it didn't do anything. I hoped that sleeping in my car would stop them from coming at night, but it didn't. It got harder and harder to go inside my house, too. There were always ants crawling up towards the ceiling on every surface they could find. I felt them squirming inside my flesh, trying so hard to get higher, but stopped only by reaching my skull. I felt the desperation, the insatiable need to go up and out, but I drank that feeling down. I started to hear the singing soon after, if it could truly be called singing. It was a constant humming sound, low and deep, calling out to me with intent. I wanted to answer it, let it tug and pull me up, but to what I didn't know. Every fiber of my being screamed in constant, itching pain, and it demanded that I follow the music. But I didn't want to. I tried to stay away. I crashed at a friend's place for a few nights, but the same dreams would come, and when I awoke, I would be standing in my driveway, the music burning deep inside. The other night, I gave up. I couldn't run any longer. I went up to the door in my bedroom that led up to the attic. Its frame was covered in scurrying little bodies, lines upon lines of them crawling around like guards. I reached for the doorknob, and I pulled it open. The little red creatures swarmed the walls, all streaming upwards as the music got louder and louder. I couldn't feel myself making the decision to move my muscles, to step forward and climb those stairs as ants swarmed onto my exposed legs, biting skin and burrowing inside. But I moved all the same. When I finally made it up the stairs, they were all over me. The attic was in no better condition than I was, every surface covered in the swarm. I flicked on the light. It was tinged with their faint red color. The shadow of those ants danced over all the others. Everything was covered. Everything save for an empty circle in the very center of the attic. A solitary patch of floor that remained entirely untouched. I moved forward, feet crushing ants beneath as more swarmed on and into me, crawling with eagerness through my veins. I laid down on that empty spot, curling up into a ball, and for one single moment, I felt free. The ants crawled out of me, off of me, and away from the light. I couldn't hear the singing. I was at peace, and the ants couldn't touch me. It was in that spot that I fell asleep, and I slept sound. When I woke up, the ants were gone. The walls were clear, the traps all empty, not a single ant in sight of my house. They had just vanished, just like that. In one single night, every ant had just gone away. It was far too good to be true for those crawling, biting things to be gone on no more than a whim. I searched and I searched, tearing apart every inch of my house to find any sign of those disgusting, filthy ants, but there was nothing. I knew they weren't gone. I could hear them screaming that awful music. I covered every inch of myself, hoping that they wouldn't be able to get me. They wouldn't be able to find a place to bite and burrow. But it didn't work. Every time I sleep, I feel them, and every waking moment I itch so very deeply. This house is still full of ants, and they are hiding from me. I feel it with every breath I take, every movement I make. There are still ants inside this house, and they want to get inside of me. They want to turn me into their nest, but I will not let it happen. I can't see them, can't find them, but they gnaw at me when I sleep. Please, please get rid of the ants. I want to go home. I want to sleep peacefully. Justin lay sobbing on the ground, and his veins squirm with 1,000 tiny lives. The exterminator nods their head and opens the door to the back of their van. They disappear as Justin's entire body convulses and his skin writhes. He itches on every inch of his body. He tries to scratch, but it does nothing. He coughs up blood, the dark red liquid filled with tiny flecks of black writhing things. The exterminator steps back out of the van and holds out a single vial of black liquid. Drink. It will make sure they cannot live inside you, they say, and he snatches it from their gloved hands. He uncorks the vial of black liquid and downs it without a second thought. The moment it enters his body, he begins to burn from the inside out. Flames tear through his veins, rendering it uninhabitable for the life he thought was outside. The ants are turned to ash, erupting from the holes in his body as the nest is destroyed. He tries to scream, but he no longer has lungs. He writhes and convulses on the ground from the pain coursing through his entire being until the merciful moment everything stops. There is nothing left, and he is at peace. The exterminator climbs into their van and drives away, leaving behind nothing but discarded pile of clothes filled with ash.